Well, hello and welcome to another episode of the Quadruple D. And a growing rebellion is stirring within Trump's MAGA faction, this time triggered by how his team handled documents tied to Jeffrey Epstein's criminal investigation. The furor, rooted in long held suspicions about elite complicity and justice system deceit, has split Trump's closest allies and heightens distrust in centralized authority. Attorney General Pam Bondi, or as I've called her in the past, Pam Blondie, because she seems to exemplify negative stereotypes about blondes. But anyway, she's a former Florida Attorney General and Trump's pick for U.S. Attorney General in February 2025. She once promised explosive new material, a truckload of previously withheld files, she even called it, including what many believe to be Epstein's alleged client list. Yet DOJ and FBI sources later released a summary memo in July 2025. No client list existed, they said, and Epstein's death was ruled a, uh, a self act, self inflicted, and additional disclosures were blocked by sealed court orders and the need to protect victims, or so they said. And the assurances didn't placate MAGA loyalists. They insist Epstein didn't kill himself, but was silenced to hide political figures. And to be fair, it is one of the more plausible conspiracy theories out there, to the point where it doesn't sound as much like a conspiracy theory as some of the media would have you think. So, a released 10-hour jail surveillance video, including at least a missing minute, although I've heard some people say that it's more than a minute that has been excised from the surveillance footage. And it's a gap that some say was caused by routine systems that are reset at midnight. And I don't know to what extent that's true. That sounds like a bit of a fishy claim to me. I guess if you're an expert on surveillance footage, let me know. Does that happen as a common phenomenon where the video surveillance system has to shut off at midnight? That, that seems like a little bit too much of a convenient narrative to me. I don't know, but go ahead and let me know if that's how it typically works. And I suppose if you're involved in a prison system, well, for one thing, you should probably find better work than that. But aside from that, if you have experience with how surveillance footage works in a prison setting, I guess let me know too, like if this is a normal thing. Um, and of course, that missing footage was enough to fuel claims of deeper cover up stuff going on. So, inside the White House, tensions boiled over. Bondi's statements clashed with FBI Deputy Director Dan Bongino, who reminds me of that. Have you ever watched Beavis and Butthead? There's a coach character who always looks like he's boiling over with rage. Well, Dan Bongino looks like he's suffering from roid rage a lot of the time. Like he looks more like he belongs in a wrestling ring or something like that than as FBI deputy director. I mean, this country is just such a joke. I mean, we're putting these absolute clowns in the positions of power that they're in, and it's just a like a routine of embarrassment, just one embarrassment after the other, and he's another one of those. And he is himself a former conspiracy podcaster, and of course, he was appointed by Trump. And reports indicate that both confronted each other, Pam Bondi and him confronted each other in a heated July meeting. Apparently, Bongino threatened to resign if Bondi stayed in position. And sources say he even skipped work, sparking rumors that he'd walked out. So Trump restrained but publicly backing both sides in that dispute. He tried to tame the backlash. On social media, he urged his followers to unite and praised Bondi's efforts. Later, after comments about Bongino's rageaholic status, he stepped off Air Force One and said, I spoke to him. This is what Trump said. I spoke to him. Very good guy. I think he's in good shape. Well, he does look like he hits the gym, but I don't think he's in good shape psychologically. And maybe what Trump meant is that he's back on the same page. Maybe it's harder to walk away from the cult than some of us would like. And legal ally Mike Davis, known for taking up MAGA legal fights, defended the DOJ's limited transparency. He cites reasons like sealed grand jury materials, court constraints, privacy for victims of heinous crimes, and the prevalence of bogus claims reminiscent of, hearsay or whatever. And I guess the question emerges: what would have to be excluded from a release of such information, and what would need to be included? Because it is true. I mean, this is the tricky part of it, because just because you know somebody who was a an accused criminal or a convicted criminal, it doesn't necessarily mean you were involved in the crimes. So that's why this is probably going to be it's going to probably end up as more of a muted issue than the media is kind of making it out right now, because I think they've got kind of a sort of a built-in way to work around these controversies, and that is just to say, oh, we can't release all of this information because it might falsely implicate people and blah blah blah. I mean, everybody knows that they're trying to avoid releasing information that might incriminate Donald Trump. I mean, everybody knows that's one of the reasons, or I mean, not everybody, but people outside of the cult. But when push comes to shove, I think they're going to be able to get away with not releasing all of the details, because they can always just claim that they're protecting the innocent. And MAGA sentiment remains fractured. Some high profile voices like the Loon Loomer, Steve Bannon, Megyn Kelly, Tucker Carlson, and Alex Jones denounced Bondi and praised Bongino. Many call for Bondi's ouster. Others side with the DOJ's stance, citing legal protocols and due process, much like I just said. So this isn't just a PR crisis, it's sort of a symbolic rupture. Epstein's case has long represented the deeper rot, that a lot of critics of government highlight. You've got state power protecting elites under secrecy, Bondi's role as Florida's attorney general in the 2008 sweetheart deal for Epstein already cast doubt on her commitment to justice. Now, conservatives feel betrayed by what they see as an empty promise and a half revealed file dump that did little more than rehash public documents. And, from the sort of radical boogeyman anarchist angle, I would say this controversy strips away the thin veneer of transparency by centralized power, because Bondi's and FBI's cautious stance, motivated by legal constraints and institutional inertia, it really shows the predictable shutdown of radical truths by bureaucracy. They're protecting the guilty in the name of protecting the innocent, more than likely. Meanwhile, military-like control over information, sealed grand jury records, and video redactions reinforce the idea that law enforcement protects insiders and not public interest. So, as far as I know, the grand jury records all they would have to do is conceal the identities of the grand jury members themselves. I'm not sure to what extent they would have to hide everything, you know, other than that, the other identities. I don't think they would necessarily need to do a lot of that. So Trump's attempt to fizzle out the issue, labeling Epstein as nobody's business, and saying that everyone's done talking about it, falls flat for those demanding accountability. People want to know who's on that list, and they want some people to be brought to justice, at least, in some cases. Although, of course, you got that statute of limitations thing that might be applicable in Florida. I'm not sure. I know some states got rid of that, but it might be something that is happening for Florida. And Trump's base sees a pact of silence. Well, not everyone in the base, of course, but some of them do. Epstein died, files are limited, elite patrons incognito. So any radical or grassroots fighter questioning hierarchical power sees this as more of the same, elitist protection rackets masquerading as law and governance. So I'm just going to do a quick recap of what I said, just to tell you what's been verified, to try to separate this from my more speculative comments here. So the DOJ and FBI memo of July 2025 asserts no client list and legal limits to protect victims, and Epstein's death was ruled self-inflicted. And there is a missing 1 minute video that appears to be deliberate. The systems are supposedly reset at midnight, and they say it's not proof of some cover up or something like that. Now, again, that does sound. This is my added commentary here. That does sound weird. Like, why would they need to do that? I don't know. It just seems like in this day and age, you could probably have 24/7 streaming footage. Even back when this happened in the prison, I think they still had the capability of 24/7 streaming footage. So, now, of course, there's the Bondi versus Bongino clash over public messaging, and Bongino supposedly threatened resignation even. Trump publicly defended both of them, praising Bondi, and confirmed Bongino was in good shape. And Epstein's 2008 plea under Bondi's watch, I almost said wrath. Anyway, the plea under Bondi's watch drew criticism. His max sentence was just 13 months out of, and he was out of jail with a work release, apparently. And beyond the spin, this whole thing really shows the power of hoarding information, controlling narratives, and shielding elites under layers of legal and bureaucratic opacity, or is it opacity? I don't know how that's pronounced exactly. And this is the logic not of governments, but of guarded privilege. They're, in my view, they're using the veil of protecting the innocent as a way of actually protecting people who are most likely guilty. All right, so the second segment of this episode, the peripheral poophead of the week, and that is Ghislaine Maxwell. I have been told that it's pronounced Ghislaine, but we're gonna go ahead and call her Ghislaine, because with her reputation and her work history, she let a lot of elite men down the jizz lane where they could safely do that. And the the whole thing is it's scandalous. She is a scandalous person. So who is Ghislaine? She's a convicted trafficker, And that she used to be a socialite, as they call them. But Ghislaine Noel Marion Maxwell, born on December 25th, 1961, so she was like a Christmas gift to the clientele, I suppose, of the future. But anyway, she is a convicted sex offender with British, French, and U.S. citizenship. So actually, she's like an immigrant. Wow, how about that? So that's ironic because at this very point in history, Donald Trump is trying to strip legal citizens of their citizenship, and that seems to mostly be if they are non-white. Well, how convenient. And here you have somebody who is, again, a convicted trafficker who is not being stripped of U.S. citizenship. She's not being sent over to the what are they calling it, alligator Alcatraz, or some people are calling it alligator Auschwitz. She's not being sent there. How convenient. It's almost like rich white people are going to be able to get away with, a lot of stuff, even if they are people of mixed citizenship. And she was once a polished fixture of elite circles in London and New York, and she was found guilty in December 2021 of recruiting and grooming minors for Jeffrey Epstein, a scheme that spanned the late 1990s into the mid 2000s. A Manhattan jury convicted her on 5 of 6 counts, ranging from transporting minors across state lines to facilitating sex trafficking. So, the court's verdict and sentence on June 28th, 2022, Judge Allison Nathan sentenced Maxwell to 240 months or 20 years behind bars, plus 5 years of supervised release and a $750,000 fine. And prosecutors had pushed for 30 to 55 years, labeling her instrumental in a decade long abuse ring targeting vulnerable teenage girls. But she got a deal, and you know, she got the sense that she got. And she was Epstein's partner in crime. Evidence presented at trial detailed how Maxwell groomed girls as young as 14 by befriending them, funding their travel or schooling, and gradually introducing them to Epstein's abuse. She helped recruit new victims as the scheme's network expanded. Affluent, globe-trotting, and well-connected, she used her privilege as a tool, facilitating silence, control, and coordination within Epstein's homes. So she also used charity as a facade. In 2012, Maxwell founded the Terra More Project, focusing on high seas conservation. It drew attention at UN meetings. Uh, Apparently, there was a TED Talk involved, or a TEDx, in 2014, and there was interest in what she was doing there, but it never distributed meaningful grants, from what I understand, from what I've read up on it. Records show zero grant making from 2013 to 2017. Instead, it's said that Terra Mar covered salaries, web development, travel, and legal fees, often funded by Maxwell personally. And there was a collapse following Epstein's arrest. Within days of his arrest in July 2019, Terramar US closed. Its UK arm folded months later. Critics argued the charity served as a smokescreen to whitewash Maxwell's public image and obscure her dark dealings. So, again, from the wicked anarchic viewpoint, Maxwell really exemplifies how wealth and power shield abusers, and charities become propaganda tools, not instruments of genuine change. Well, at least in some cases, and in this case, apparently, Terramar's shell of legitimacy. It shows how NGOs can serve as cover for systemic abuse. The justice system's decision to imprison Maxwell, while significant, still raises questions. It addresses personal culpability, but leaves intact the broader systems. You still have some degree of elite impunity, financial secrecy, and political patronage that enabled this entire abuse network. So she had a role in trafficking. Obviously, she participated in the grooming network from way back in 1994 to 2004, focusing on underage girls from financially precarious backgrounds, a regular pattern of abusive behavior. It's the same type of demographic that a lot of serial killers might target. And she was found guilty on 5 charges, including sex trafficking and transporting minors, sentenced in June 28, 2022, 20 years in prison, supervised release, and a financial penalty. And, well, you get the idea. She was a disreputable person. And, you know, the closure of Terra Mar, the fact that it closed down abruptly after Epstein's arrest, it does highly suggest a PR motive for that organization. And the Maxwell Epstein case reveals how money and social standing can safeguard predators, and that's why so many people are demanding greater action on such issues. So, cracking down on individuals isn't enough. You have to dismantle these structural scaffolds, these elite networks, nonprofit PR fronts, and the financial opacity to prevent future abuses such as these. And on to the third segment, the fetid fever dream flashback of the week. And we're looking at Robert Maxwell, the father of Ghislaine. So, what was the biggest scandal involving Robert Maxwell? It was pension fund theft. So, yes, her father is also a scandalous figure, which I think is kind of getting buried in this whole thing because it really shows that a lot of these people are actually criminals. And to be honest, I'm surprised that so many of them are being sought by the justice system. It does kind of suggest that there is some accountability and that some people do take the concept of punishing criminals seriously, to the extent that sometimes even these wealthy elites do get targeted. But it doesn't happen often enough, and it seems to be oddly selective and all that. So you have to wonder why some people get away with things and others don't. So Robert Maxwell's most notorious scandal was the massive theft of hundreds of millions of pounds from the pension funds of his companies, particularly Mirror Group newspapers, which he owned. When he died mysteriously in 1991, falling off his yacht called Lady Ghislaine, it was revealed that he had looted roughly 400 million pounds from his employees' retirement funds to prop up his failing empire and his personal debts. So, yeah, disreputable family from all appearances. It's almost like some of these people are worse than the immigrants out there working in the fields, or washing dishes, or doing housekeeping jobs or whatever. you know, I'm not trying to stereotype all immigrants as doing that kind of work, but let's face it, that's who's often being targeted here by the Trump administration. It's not wealthy people like these. So this was not a rogue financial error. It was a systematic, calculated fraud. Maxwell used the pension funds as a piggy bank to sustain his image of power, to manipulate stock prices, and to maintain political influence. Thousands of workers faced financial ruin. He left behind a financial crater and a trail of institutional betrayal. Ghislaine Maxwell was closely tied to this world. She worked with her father and was deeply embedded in the elite networks that he cultivated. So again, it is interesting that sometimes these people do get held accountable. So I do have to wonder how that does happen sometimes because, well, it seems like it'll be happening less often in the near future. But these were crimes. So from the dreaded, sinister, anarchic perspective, Robert Maxwell's downfall isn't just about corruption, it's about the systemic rot of capitalist hierarchies and the state structures that often protect them. So, here you had capitalist theft disguised as success. Maxwell was celebrated as a self made tycoon, but his empire was built on debt, deception, and yes, exploitation. The pension fund theft is a raw example of how capitalist systems allow elites to privatize wealth and socialize risk. He didn't rob a bank, he was the bank. He was the boss, the media mogul, and the politician's friend, which again is why it's surprising that they actually go after these people sometimes. If I was one of these people, I would be shaking my boots at times because like it's convoluted because again, why do they go after them sometimes but other times not? But anyway, his theft wasn't aberrant. It was enabled by a system that rewards power accumulation without accountability. Although of course he was ultimately kind of held accountable, and there was some degree of state complicity and elite immunity here. The state and financial regulators were either asleep or complicit for at least much of this. Maxwell's companies were too big, too connected, and too political to scrutinize seriously, apparently, for a lot of the time. He had deep ties to British and Israeli intelligence services, raising credible theories that his impunity was largely due to geopolitical usefulness. And the radical anarchist types would argue that this reflects how the state doesn't serve the people, it serves the powerful. And you also had a bit of the media being used as control and not to tell the truth. So Maxwell used his media holdings to shape public opinion, silence critics, and advance his agenda. And it's a prime example of how the media, when owned by the ruling class, isn't a watchdog but a guard dog. And it defends the status quo, not the truth. It also shows the intergenerational power that ties into Ghislaine Maxwell. So Ghislaine's transition from working for her father to becoming Jeffrey Epstein's close associate follows the same pattern: elite networking, social insulation, and the use of status to evade consequences. And it shows how elite power doesn't die with a patriarch, it only evolves. So after Robert's death, Ghislaine used her connections and privilege to insert herself into Epstein's world, which would later be exposed as a hub for sexual abuse and trafficking of minors. Another system of control, manipulation, and exploitation protected by elite ties. So, Robert Maxwell's scandal is a glaring case of how systemic exploitation functions under capitalism: theft from workers, media manipulation, state negligence, and elite protection. So, this isn't exactly a failure of the system, it is the system working largely as intended to serve and protect the powerful at the expense of everyone else. So, again, that's why it's so weird that sometimes these people are held accountable. It's a bit of a convoluted system to say the least. So I kind of want your thoughts on that. Why is it that sometimes these people do get exposed, and why do they sometimes not? So that could be an interesting topic and debate, and it does complicate the narrative, doesn't it? Or whatever narrative you're pursuing. And I'm curious what your thoughts are on that. So go ahead and let me know what you think. Anyway, that's it for this episode, and have a great day.